Welcome to A Seat at the Table, a podcast powered by The Ice House, a place for courageous conversations empowering diversity and community in business. You are part of the conversation and have as much to say as anyone else. Louisa Dallow is the founder of the Experience Theory, inner belief and career development platform and services encouraging social change through a blend of behavioural science and disruptive thinking. She's all about creating conversations that lead to sustainable outcomes. She's also a listener of the podcast, A Seat at the Table, so it was a fun dynamic as we discussed what a seat at the table looks like for her, having worked in large advertising agencies and media firms. She has now been on a very recent self-discovery journey to her sense of purpose. We discuss the importance of the triple bottom line, being true to ourselves, employee experiences, where her drive and passion for impact comes from, and so much more.
So kia ora. Wonderful to have Louisa Dallow with us this morning as our guest. Louisa is founder of the Experience Theory, inner belief and career development platform and services encouraging social change through a blend of behavioral science and disruptive thinking. Boy, do we like disruptive thinking.
Yes.
So welcome, Louisa. And also, we're saying also a listener of A Seat at the Table. So great to have you here with us this morning.
Thank you so much. I feel truly honoured to be here with everyone and very excited to have the conversation with you all.
Yay.
So before we get started, everyone who has a seat at the table, we do some quick fire questions just to get under the bonnet a little bit and get to know you. So very quickly, what's your ideal holiday?
Ideal holiday has to be with water, nature, birds and bees.
Ooh, I like that.
Nice. Party with 100 or 5 people?
Absolutely 5 people. How on earth do you get round to speaking to 100 people in a short period of time?
When are you most relaxed?
Most relaxed in nature, spending time with family, away from screens and looking out to a sunset.
Awesome. What does a day in the life of Louisa look like?
Varied, sometimes hectic, sometimes overwhelming, but best at the end of the day when I'm relaxed with family.
Love it. And if you were to write a book tomorrow, what would you write about?
I would write a children's book about the importance of nostalgia and getting back into nature and how important it is to think about the future of where our world's going.
Wow.
I like that.
That's a great way to start.
That is a great way to start.
I'm just thinking of the illustrations.
Yes, yeah, it's good. And leads nicely into who is Louisa Dallow. Tell us a bit about yourself and what you're passionate about.
A bit about me, I grew up in centre parts of Auckland and my parents had a farm down on the Waikato, hence my love of nature. And I am an only child and I have one child. I think the privilege of growing up as an only child is that you get to become, well I did anyway, independent very quickly and still figuring out what I want to be, still trying to be an adult most days. I think that life for me now looks very similar to what it did if I look at my 8-year-old self, and what I want to push into and what I'm passionate about is seeing other people succeed.
Wow, I love that. Your 8-year-old self, as in like what she needed or wanted. Is that what you're wanting to listen to?
Yeah, I think that I look back and there were monumental moments for me as being a child that I now see as, you know, my adult life of that glimmer of excitement when someone else has done something on their own terms that maybe or maybe not I've had an influence in. And I think looking back at my career over corporate times and when times have been really hard, it's the dig deep mentality. Yeah. And I go back to time on the farm of, you know, spending time with chickens or the donkey I had or the pony that I had. And I think the agility and the shift that I'm wanting to make is to push into that space of leaning back into basic, but also better basics around where that future holds.
Wow, that's cool. And yeah, when we were emailing, I'll just read a little thing you said, but you said it's been a true state of soul searching to get here, both personally and professionally. Would love to just hear the journey of what maybe that statement meant then and maybe what it even means now. Yeah.
Sure. So I look back at my career and, I came out of university and I was adamant I was going to become a creative director at Saatchi's. That was the goal. I was. I didn't actually think of what even that meant. All I thought it was I want to come up with ideas. I want to be the person who's making these great ads and putting them out onto TV, but I had no comprehension of what that meant. So, I think I look back and think about the times that I've really introspectively looked at where I've had growth, and it's been through hard times and through gritty times, but it's been when I've worked with a group of people and a leader and an ideal of how do we do things differently, how do we do things better, how do we look at the future of, for our own kids or our own friends or our own family, of getting back to basics. And my idea of soul searching, whilst it's cliche, it's looking back at what can I remove out of my life that's causing complexity, that's causing me to have that level of all of the things as I lie in bed and think about the million things that I need to do tomorrow that are not going to get done in the next 15 minutes while I'm listening to my meditation on my phone. And I think it's about the pause. As we've come into 2023, I've spoken to a lot of people and they're frantic, and coming out of COVID, I think that we are still to see the impact of mental health, emotional health, people just getting back to status quo. So for me, my version of soul searching, I'd say, let's keep it short, for the next 90 days is getting back to what I'm really passionate about, and that's working with people to make change.
Wow.
So maybe tell us a little bit about, so you thought you wanted to be the creative director of Saatchi's. Then what?
So I met with a few people in the ad industry and very quickly realised that, one, I might not have the skill set around designing ads, although I thought I did with my little portfolio with my sleeves of ads that I'd made that I presented back then. I think that
is cute.
It really was. I really was trying. And then all of a sudden I thought, no, I actually want to be a planner. And I think what it was that made me change, and having spent time in creative agencies, is that you get very close to the idea, but it's like baking, right? It's you put the icing on the cake, but you don't get to make the cake at the end of the day. And I look back at my time of, thrilling times in agencies, but really hard, gritty times in agencies. At the end of the day, you are, responsible for delivering to the client's business and the output of what they're looking to. And I wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't done that client service piece, or the long hours, or the thrilling awards. Or I think the notion of what brought me into advertising was the storytelling and narrative, and the nostalgia of looking back at those beautiful ads made from telecom, my age, and also just the piece around connection. And that's what I break it down into in terms of where my career has taken me.
Yeah.
An agency can be quite a scary place. Lots of egos.
Yes.
How, or did you have a level of imposter syndrome in agency, and also coming out of agency and following your dreams? How did that sort of sit with you?
Absolutely. I remember my interview with the then GM at Saatchi's, and I remember him saying to me, if you're looking at working for Saatchi's, this is a worldwide brand. If you go down and say to a farmer down in the South Island, what's this no man's brand of an agency? And I can't remember the agency that he said, but if you say you're going to work for Saatchi's, everyone knows who we are. So there was this degree of me going in with how I thought I needed to act to stay competitive above all of the other suits that I was working with, and the creatives, planners, traffic, media, etc. So I'd already gone in with, to stay at a level playing board, I need to fake it until I make it. And, that proved right in some areas, but at the end of the day, I would go back to how do I make my client's business more sustainable whilst making it profitable for the agency.
Wow. Do you know, in terms of your personality type, are you A-type, B-type, achiever personality? Did you thrive in that setting initially where you were like, you need me to do this? Yes, I will throw everything into this.
Initially, I did thrive. I think where, interestingly enough, talking about purpose, where I was detracted from that scenario was where we were maybe working on a brief that actually didn't feel like it was ethically the right place for us to be, or the right type of purpose, the right type of shoot, the right type of cost model that we'd have. And I remember speaking to my account director at the time, and she said, we're a business model, we're here to make money. And I said, but ultimately customers aren't going to know what this offer is or how to even, accept it. We're just competing with the other biggest telco out there, and it was at the end of the line focused on bottom line. So yes, initially it was, and I found this right throughout my career of going in, guns blazing, and yes, I can thrive, but sort of I'd liken it to starting with a large flag that I was waving for myself, and I would come out with a toothpick with a little cloth at the end of it. And I want to get to a place with building this platform around the experience theory of driving that level of passion to bring companies, leaders, businesses, people along that journey where they can make sustainable change.
And, how do you balance the bottom line, because that is important, with purpose?
Well, I had a conversation with Liz this morning on this exact topic, and for me, I think a non-negotiable is triple bottom line. So many organisations are absolutely focused, inwardly on profit first. Outwardly, they talk about people and planet, and obviously that's a great brand story. It brings people along the journey. But if you're not consistent internally, you've got a field of people who are your internal brand advocates that will go out and actually tell people it's not like that on the inside.
Yeah.
And that's very damaging for brands, because I look at the bigger, finance companies and telco companies, they're looking at staff of between 3,000 and 7,000 people. Every day they have the opportunity to be brand advocates. So for me, it's not a one or the other, it's an all three in the order of people, planet, profit.
Interesting, yeah.
Can I take you back, because I think there's value in thinking about your learning. Go back to that conversation with the general manager at Sashi's and the imposter syndrome kind of thing. Do you have any advice for women, not applying for roles because of, or leadership positions because they don't feel they're worthy, or they have imposter phenomenon or something like that? What would be your advice around maybe that lack of confidence that comes with that?
I think it's a great question. I think we need to break down this version of imposter syndrome. I had a great talk recently which was talking about growth moments, because syndrome automatically puts you on the back foot of something. I've got something wrong with me, so I don't have 100% of what they're looking for in the job ad, so therefore I can't apply. There's a very famous study done about 10 years ago in terms of what women would apply for and what obviously our counterparts of men would apply for. And I'm not saying that we need to have that mentality of, oh yeah, well I think I can do it, so I should just launch on, and then actually going in and realising that maybe I don't. I think the biggest thing around a growth moment is getting the right people around you in your community, getting the right coaches and the right mentors to help you find those dull spots or weak spots of where you could be pushing into a space that is the unknown. I think that people are going into 2023, risk adverse, but I would challenge that to be thinking smaller. How do we de-risk a situation from where I might feel like I can't? Well, what's that feeling? Is it from legacy thinking of roles you'd applied for? Has it been, friends and family who've said, oh, that's not right for you, or you can't do that? It's actually coming from their own introspective judgments and their own ways of thinking. And it is hard to take that step. It is hard to think, well, actually, I could do it, but it might not be right now. No just means next opportunity. And I think, as I said, it's surrounding yourself with people who are going to give you that leg up, but show you where the weaknesses are.
And what about for more mature women who may have taken a career break, or they've been in a career and they want to pivot? I've had a couple of conversations with women in their 40s, and they're like, everyone's obsessed with the young guns, which, can see why, but what about us? We've got skills and experience, but we feel a little forgotten. What would you say to the more mature lady?
Biggest thing I could say there is wisdom comes from different places, comes from different pockets, meeting different people. Life experiences throw you into a place where ultimately I see that there's this foundational bed of activities that happen, your daily habits, behaviours and communities that you connect with, that ultimately if you're in a tough situation or a scenario where you're thinking, I can't speak to that leader, that CEO, or even I couldn't apply for that or I couldn't do that thing, when was a time that you've looked back in your life where you have done it in a different scenario? And I had that advice recently of, well, you know, if you're looking at a leadership position, you're a parent. That's being a leader and showing up, you know, you're growing this human being. And I thought, oh, that's daunting and terrifying. And I thought, but actually when you're looking at coaching or leading a team, that's essentially what it is. You know, they're the biggest champion for them, your biggest ambassador. It's how you navigate that for them in terms of, you know, what leadership looks like.
I don't know where I was, but I'm, you know, I can't remember what forum the conversation came up in, but, you know, picking up on that concept of reverse mentoring, you know, the need for those of us who are a little bit further along in our lives, to acknowledge and appreciate that young people have a lot to teach us and show us, and we have to be open to, you know, that. Just because we're older doesn't mean we're necessarily wiser across everything. And then the other way around, young people need to appreciate and value that older people have some wisdom and some experiences that might be useful to them because they're not there yet. So
Respect both ways.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely.
And an openness to learning both ways.
There's an incredible program that was actually done through Virgin by a woman. There's a TED Talk. Her name is Patricia, and she has run a very successful reverse mentoring program for senior level execs, C-suite, for up and coming young people in organisations, up-and-coming leaders, talking about how do we talk to our future workforce about how to build our culture.
Yeah, wow.
And the interesting thing about that is that you have to have a very vulnerable C-suite team, vulnerable leadership team to go along that journey, because there's this stigma out there, as you say, Liz, of but what would they know? They're just coming out of university. But actually, you know, I look at where the world's going, and there's a lot that, you know, younger people coming out of university or not can bring into the workforce.
It's that redefining what leadership means to a certain generation, because there, and fortunately I think this has changed quite a lot, but, you know, where leadership was about having all the answers. No. That's that vulnerability. It's okay to not know. Somebody else might know the answers that, you know, have the answers to things that I don't. And the best way for me to lead is to ask the right questions.
Absolutely.
There's like a quote that's like, people prefer leaders that are real over always right, or always real over always right. And I'm like, so true. You know, when you've got someone, when you've got someone that's like, just has to be right, but you know, everyone else is like, this is awkward, or someone that comes in and is just real, like, I think that's...
I don't know.
Yeah.
That's right. I think the leadership model absolutely needs a shake-up from leaders having to know the level of absolutely technical skills, but if they don't, that's okay. How can they get people in that might be able to support their teams with what they could help them learn in terms of capability? And there's an area of actually, well, I don't know, so how do I empower my team with what the know is?
Yeah.
How would you talk to our future workforce?
Future workforce it's an interesting one, right? Because AI is prevalent in our society today, with ChatGPT 4 coming out recently. I think that the area for learning and area for growing, if we don't see that as part of our everyday and we don't use it as a core partner, it's going to leave a lot of people behind. And I think that there's this real notion of how to co-create and co-design the future workforce for things looking differently. You know, remote working and hybrid working, you know, all of these terms that are used are, I think, bantered around in some organisations where they have created them not necessarily in a co-create fashion with their workforce. And of course, lots of people would say, I'd love to work from home, but also you don't get that interaction and water cooler conversation when you're always working from home either.
Totally.
So I think it's a balance.
Yeah.
And I think technology is going to have a huge part, if not already, in how that enables our future learning as well and capability.
And when you say co-create, what do you mean by that?
So, for example, it would be the future of working could look like this. What's working for you in your day? How much time are you spending on emails? How much time are you spending with people? How much time are you spending on learning? What does innovation look like to you? It's actually going out and, as simple as it is, talking to your people, talking to the groups of people who are the lowest engaged, who might just show up for 9 to 5. But then what about the other end of the spectrum of people who are highly engaged, the people who are advocating for your organisations on social media, but then also bringing those two groups together and finding the similarities.
Interesting. Can you unpack a bit about your decision to jump into the experience theory? And, so you're just in a role at NZME, sorry. And then you've now decided to go out on your own. Can you talk about that and then maybe explain the mission behind the organisation as well?
So the reason I decided to leave, it comes down to purpose and alignment. So for me, spending time in corporates, it's very easy to go in bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, guns blazing, as I talked about before. But I seem to have a reoccurring current, I would say, of electricity that if I can't push enough of what that purpose looks like for greater good around triple bottom line, then what am I supposed to be doing? And I feel like I had that decision within the last 3 months of either I dive into the deep end, but the deep end actually might be really fun and might have some cocktails at the end of it with some nice lounges at the end of the pool. So for me, it comes down to alignment. And the experience theory is, I would call, a platform on 2 parts. The first part of it is working with an undercurrent with leaders through a series of events and partnership activity where I can build communities and have courageous conversations. And then the other part of it is partnering with organisations who genuinely want to make sustainable, transformative change.
Yeah, awesome. I love that. Very, very cool. Does that look like services to you and maybe consulting, especially maybe the second half in terms of, what does that consulting piece look like?
Yes, absolutely. So yes, consulting, and I've worked with many agencies and consultants in the past, and where I feel the sweet spot is that coming in and truly understanding how to de-risk a situation. Looking at the DVF, desirability, feasibility, viability framework around design thinking. It's a lot of organisations go in with, well, let's get a big partner and they'll solve it all for us. They'll come up with a model. Our people will be on the journey. We'll run a whole bunch of workshops. Here we go. We'll leave you with the debt. No one knows what to do. People get disencouraged. The restructure happens and the whole thing happens all over again. Yeah. So where I see the sweet spot, thinking about the book Blue Ocean Strategy, which is a great read.
Somebody just mentioned that book to me this morning.
Oh, wow, I love it.
Amazing.
So the idea or notion of Blue Ocean Strategy is, why are you competing in the red with all the other sharks? Why aren't you thinking about where that pain point or sweet spot is for where you can deliver whatever your brand is, whatever your product is, consulting services, etc. So for me, it's not just about going in and saying I'll do all the things in the workshops, which absolutely I will do. It's having that deep level of empathy and understanding, but also helping with delivery, because I love rolling my sleeves up and getting into the front line. That's where the magic happens.
Which industries do you think need it the most?
Which industries? Finance.
Yeah.
Finance.
How come?
There is still a lot to be done on how we talk about money and the importance of future-proofing money. And I hate to, single out women, but there's a reason why businesses, Girls That Invest, The Curve, and Francis is out there talking about how to have courageous conversations about looking after your money better, so that it's not just about saving it for a rainy day. It's about how do we create a sustainable conversation. Telco is another one, and many people think, but it's just my broadband, or it's just my phone that works. But actually, if those services are taken away from us, what does that mean? In terms of our habits that we form. So I think there's a lot of businesses that could do with a dose of reality, and it's a hard conversation to have about, well, you've done all these things and they haven't worked. Why haven't they worked?
Interesting.
Well, that's the reflection that I think, again, more of us, and that's individuals and businesses, need to think about. Like, okay, so it didn't work. Spend a little bit of time processing why that might have been the case, so that you can do something differently the next time. And it's the same thing with, consulting. And I've been in this game a fair little while myself, but the idea that there's a change process that has to be acknowledged in order to embrace and make new things happen. And often we get some of it right in terms of here's the technical or whatever thing, but we don't acknowledge the behavior change that's required in an organization to embrace that. And I think...
What would you say to businesses that are like, you know what, we're doing fine. We're gunning it. We're doing really, really well. Why would we change?
The question I would ask then is, if there was a leader in a room with their team and that leader left the room, what would their team say about that leader? How vulnerable and open would they feel that they could be about a situation or a scenario? Because time that I've spent in corporates is that, everything's fine. Don't look behind the curtain, I'm fine. But realistically, it's actually, I'm having some real problems at home. My mental health isn't coping. My husband or wife needs support. So how does that show up for me in a day-to-day? It's having some very vulnerable conversations, I think, with people. And that's what I talked about before, about how might we look at a low engaged group in an organisation, or someone, in another, retrospectively, a higher engaged group. There's a great quote around this, which is, to change someone's behaviour, change their environment. So James Clear, who's written a book called Atomic Habits, talks a lot about changing the situation to get people to make a sustainable action.
And I think you said this morning when we caught up for a coffee, which was lovely, that, in answer to Mel's question, I think, it's how do they define we're doing fine, we're gunning it? Like, what are their measures, and maybe we need to just adjust their thinking. I mean, your view of, triple bottom line is, you could be making lots of money and, your customers and people might be saying they're really happy, but if you looked at people and planet and profit, would you still say you're gunning it and doing fine? Absolutely. And I think that's your challenge right now, isn't it?
It is.
I think it's a long-term view too, right? Absolutely. And I think businesses go, success equals hitting your short-term KPIs or whatever. But if we asked, and I think ISAS does this, I know you've sat in meetings, it's like, what does it look like for the ISAS in 40 years? Which blew my mind. If we look at it from that perspective, then all of this stuff rises to the top. And I think, I think what I'm really interested in your space is, that behavioural change, because I do think that leaders need to have their own conviction for this to work. Like, if they're just going off what a consultant comes in and passes on the thing, then it won't be embedded into the culture. So it's interesting to hear, what does behavioural change look like for these C-suite leaders? And is it happening fast enough? And you can't force people to do things, but it's an interesting combo. There's my brain just dumped in that little...
It's what I love about the Cynic book called Infinite Game, because I think, again, what I've heard Louisa say is embracing the idea that we are playing a long game.
For sure.
It's very hard for businesses, leaders, shareholders, exec boards to get on board with long-term change, especially with where we are now, with revenue being tight, the inflation going up, people are really hurting out there. So from a de-risking perspective, to change behaviour, it's a hard narrative to go into an organisation with, because they're starting with a metric which needs to drive results, which needs to drive objectives, which needs to drive revenue. So it's working out a way of, but how might we take some of your people who are really excited about career development and growth and get them thinking differently? Can we run small experiments in the background? Can we look at one part of the metric that you're trying to track that might take you the next 6 months? Can we run it over 2 weeks? So it's not burning through time, resource, people, and just to try different things. If they don't work out, fine, what do we learn from them?
That's so interesting. What's your purpose through this? Like, how have you come to a sense of what your purpose is?
My purpose, I think that if I look back at my time and where I've really enjoyed time, it's seeing people think about what their own worth is differently, how they show up in Teams, Zoom, Google Meet, and organisations, how they carry themselves into meetings, seeing a shift in others from I'm terrified to now I've got courage, even just to have one great conversation, reach out to a coach or a mentor, or me, from a purpose perspective, it's just seeing other people, happy and joy. I think that we need a lot more joy in our everyday.
Happened to you when you were 8 years old to get to here? Really, you were quite specific on the age. What was it that happened when you were 8 years old to get to this? I just want to unpack that a little bit.
Sure. There was a specific moment where my father said to me, I was doing something or building something, and I said to him, what are you trying to do? He said, I'm not trying to do it, I'm doing it. And it was a monumental moment in time where I thought, but what if I try something and it doesn't work? How do I learn? And so I felt like it was a growth moment of, I am going to do this when I'm older. I'm going to try a bunch of things, and it might not be to society's way of conforming of what I should be doing or what my mother wanted me to do, to go to Auckland University and do arts. I did not. I went to Auckland AUT and I did a Bachelor of Business in Marketing and Advertising, which doesn't exist. Yeah, that's
Same.
Don't remember any part of the advertising side. But I look at that moment, and I look at moments through school of doing social science and human behaviour. Should have done psychology. That's the plan for second half of this year. To think about what makes people thrive, and it's testing, learning, failing, and doing it all again.
Wow.
Thank you.
We ask everyone, who comes in as a guest, what does a seat at the table mean to you, and how has that affected the way you've led teams in your career?
A seat at the table for me means giving the quietest person in the room a voice and allowing them to bring what their version of a great idea might be to the table. I think as I've grown through my own career of versions of seniority and somewhat wisdom, I think about the times where I've been given a voice of, Louisa, what do you think? And it's been what do I say? And I have an opinion and I have to show up, but actually I wouldn't be there if they didn't value my opinion. So yes, it's a physical seat, but it's a mental seat as well.
That's interesting.
It's beautiful.
Going back to that 8-year-old and then also, beyond in your career, what's some advice you would tell that girl? And maybe this also the same you that said, I'm going to be the creative director at Saatchi's. What would you tell that person?
Don't stop. Keep going. It might be something hard that looks really difficult right in front of you, but it's just a moment. It's going to pass. The grit can be real, but actually you can push it aside, and it can be that pool of things, of opportunities.
Awesome. That's really cool.
So what excites you about the next year of this journey that you've just embarked on?
Yeah.
The thing that excites me most is leaning into my own growth moment of I can't to how could I. And
I love that.
Partnering with like-minded people who get the unknown, who are willing to face into some of the unknown, which in this climate is understandably terrifying. It's how I can get them to see a version of better basics, simplicity, and giving stuff a go. I think that there needs to be more playfulness in organisations and more inquisitiveness and curiosity in the work that we do. And the idea, I heard someone talk a few weeks ago, let's not have a meeting in a room, let's go have a walking meeting. What's that? And actually this idea of looking at the sky and getting fresh air breathes, innovation and creativity.
Yeah. What does success look like for you if we had this conversation in 10 years' time?
Success for me looks like being able to, I think, imprint my wisdom and knowledge and coming from agencies and organisations where people are able to dictate what their own purpose is. And whilst that is obviously around ideally making money to pay bills in all organisations and for individuals, it's, people coming back to me of, remember we met 10 years ago and you had that quote around growth moments. Well, I took that job and I made that leap, or I broke up with my boyfriend because it wasn't great for me, or I did that leadership job and I actually really didn't like it, so I went to be a gardener. It's the reframe on the conversation. That's what I would love anyway, to be, and have that level of memory, in 10 years' time.
You've got a younger boy, that's right, in primary school.
Yes.
How do you speak to him to set him up for a win going through society? Because, the norm is so linear, and we've talked about that quite a lot on this podcast. How do you set him up to go, hey, you can be who you want to be, as long as, give it your all or whatever?
It's a great question. I have stopped having the conversation with him about what do you want to be when you grow up.
Good.
I have started having the conversation about what gives you joy, what makes you happy.
I love that.
What do you talk about with your friends that is not related to Fortnite? That you get that feeling of, I'm excited, or I want to do something differently. And I've seen a real shift in him where I ask him at the end of every day, what gave you joy today? What made you upset today? What made you angry today? Because you try and ask a 9-year-old or any child, what did you do at school today? Nothing. How was school? Boring. So it's reframing the conversation, and I want to encourage him to be whatever he wants to be. And my mum said to me, you've got to go to university and you've got to get a degree and you've got to pass school C. That's definitely my age. Didn't pass school C, but the norm, didn't go to Auckland University. And I think it's about having that courage to take that leap, especially with the younger generation, and hopefully with him.
It's so interesting.
What do people misunderstand about you most?
Biggest misconception about me and feedback I've had before is, Louisa, you went in, you're quite aggressive. You went in there and, you definitely, maybe just soften the conversation. And I find that really interesting. It's definitely, I think it's come from leaders, it's come from female leaders, and I wonder, is that a version of them that I might be intimidating to them? I don't actually know. So for me, I think I go in and I've taken that feedback on board with this level of, okay, open curiosity and open empathy and less aggression towards it has to be my version of what right looks like.
Interesting.
It is interesting because it is down to how people interpret, behaviour, and see it as aggressive. And we do need to take that on board, because if we want people to get, kind of go with us, then sometimes we have to temper our approach. But that's interesting.
But I think when you're so passionate about something, it can come across as aggressive. I don't know if aggressive is the right word, but passionate.
But sometimes you have to frame that, don't you? And almost like unplugging it. Now, I hope this doesn't come across as too aggressive. I'm just really passionate about this right now. And it's almost like you got to get over the fact that you're trying to excuse it, because that's not helpful. But I think it's just a reframe of where that's coming from. But
for sure.
And I think sometimes it might come from the other person's perspective of fear, maybe of, they want to do it, or she wants to do it this way, but I know it's not going to work, but what if it might? Fixed to growth mindset.
So interesting.
What if?
Yeah, what if? There's lots of little pockets of gold in this. It's really good.
I'll say.
We finish the podcast with this beautiful question. I love hearing the answers. Who is one person that you'd like to thank that has been influential in your journey?
I would like to personally thank a extraordinary coach and mentor that I've had. We had what we called an arranged marriage professionally about 18 months ago, Jane Treadwell-Hoy. Jane has been a level of inspiration for me when I have hit rock bottom over the past 18 months, but also the I can't moments and should I moments. And we've bounced ideas across each other, and having someone like that can scrape you up and wrap cotton wool around you when you need it, but also say, just kind of suck it up and get on with it. I think that everyone kind of needs that sort of person in their life.
That's so cool. Did you reach out to her or did she reach out to you?
It's really interesting, actually. We worked together on a consulting piece of work for NZME, and when I initially applied for that role, I thought, I don't have all of those skills. And what had happened is they'd actually employed Jane, and Jane said, look, I cannot do this piece of work on my own. I need a partner to come in. And that's how we met, and we hit it off. And it was through lockdown, it was hard, we couldn't meet in person. We delivered a piece of work to the board in 31 days, which we actually worked out would normally take generally between 6 and 9 months. And it was a true blend of how might we, how could we, bringing our two worlds together, which collided in a lovely professional arranged marriage.
Wow, that makes sense. Cool. Oh, well, thank you so much for sharing your story, and we're really excited to see where this heads as well, and the impact that you have within individuals and businesses will be significant. So thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to seeing where it goes, and to everyone out there who's thinking about taking a leap, do it, but maybe don't take a leap as big as you think you need to. Small steps, one foot in front of the other.
Love that. Thanks for listening to A Seat at the Table. If you haven't already, check out Season 1 to hear similar business and leadership stories empowering diversity and community. See you next month.